Hello, we're live. It's been 2 weeks, so we're back. I'm gonna cough and splutter, but that's okay. Right. Hello. We're live. Stop watching my own thing so I don't get some kind of horrid feedback loop. Okay, so let's see. The first person who has asked for feedback is Joe Doom. And Joe Doom has posted this and said, "This is a priest design that I did for an assignment. Turned out better than my last one, but I'm still hoping I could improve it." I'm not entirely clear on what the parameters are, other than it being a priest, and so we'll just have to judge it on that basis. The main thing that I'm seeing when I look at it is a few things, and I think we can break them down into design related issues and we'll say execution. I think they're two very different things, right? You don't want to think about them at the same time necessarily. I think splitting them up might be a good idea. So, design-wise, I look at this and I don't think it's a priest. My first thought is it's much more like a monk. Potentially it's the robes and the staff. Probably mainly the staff, and the stance is a lot more sort of aggressive and sort of fighty than a priest, which I might associate as someone that stood a bit more still. Instead of a staff, maybe they have a book or an item or a weapon that would be much more passive, if that makes sense. And even the colours that a priest might have, right? You were assuming it's from some kind of specific religious order. This one in particular is Egyptian inspired, I'm assuming. But maybe there are some more striking colours that we can choose from, purples and things that say that this character is part of the priesthood or the clergy, that they're part of an organised group. Because at the moment the clothes are a little bit plain feeling, which makes it again seem a bit more like a monk, someone that's actually sacrificed their worldly belongings. So let's write that down so we don't forget. Yeah, I think it's the aggressiveness, which is like the weapon, the stance. Okay. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the execution. One of the main things that I notice immediately with the execution of it is this very 2D iconography sort of feeling that's going on, right? So the face is a perfect orthographic side profile. This triangle shape behind the guy is perfectly side on. The staff is perfectly side on 2D. And it leaves it feeling very stiff and mechanical and not very dynamic. It could be he's Egyptian inspired, that you are going for something that's very deliberately hieroglyphic almost, right? That it's meant to have this flattened isometric perspective to it. I think that would be cool, but maybe we could lean into it further with things like the feet and the arms, and actually we could play into those angles more. Could this arm come up and then go down at a perfect right angle and things? And could it be even more like a hieroglyph? Otherwise, I want to see this stuff in 3D space. Now, the reason I want to see it in a more sort of dynamic 3D angle isn't necessarily just because it looks cooler, which I think it does, But because your job here when you're designing this character is to describe parts of the design to someone else who might want to draw it from a different angle, someone else who might want to model it, someone else who just might want to imagine it from different viewpoints and things like that. And at the moment I look at the shoulder device that's going on, and because it's so flat and side on perfectly, it's not actually giving me much information as to its form. So let's carve out a bit of light for us. So you have effectively this diamond shape going on, and there's some stuff on top of it, right? But it's very sort of graphic. You know, instead, could we, as soon as we decide to show this from maybe like a 3/4 angle, well, now we know that it's conical and this thing is curving around. You know, we'll know exactly how much thickness this has. Maybe it doesn't do that. You know, maybe on the back of it, it curves around more like that, more like a dome. It could be doing that right now, and I wouldn't know. It could be like maybe it doesn't curve at all. Maybe it is like a pyramid sort of shape, very angular. Well, that's fine as well, but it's not defined from the angle that we're seeing currently, right? So choosing a more dynamic angle is going to help with that. Same thing with the staff. It's perfectly flat side on at the moment, so I don't necessarily know how far this is coming out towards me as a viewer. So it could be doing something like this. Let's say that's the handle. Well, it could be, you know, a box like that. Perspective's a little bit whack. Have to forgive me. You know, it could be doing that, and then it's got another box on top, or it could be doing something like this, right? And there's a very, very different shape just based on the same angle that you're providing us. So yeah, a 3/4 angle is going to be more descriptive. By the very nature of this being flat and side on, I guess we're not getting any Z depth. We're getting X and Y axes, but not the Z axis, so things don't feel 3D. The last thing I want to talk about, and I'll move on pretty quick from this one, I think, is just the contrast between some of these mechanical parts and the rest of it that feels very sort of traditionally cloth-like. I mean, we can look at the ratio of these things, and by that I mean, well, how much of it is mechanical? Well, here's a big mechanical shape. We've got mechanical shoulder pads, these big mechanical bits. We will say the belt is mechanical, little bits on the arms. The staff is certainly mechanical. And you'll find that it ends up being, if it isn't a 50-50 ratio between mechanical and non-mechanical, it's a 60-40 ratio. So it's pretty close, right? It's a pretty even split. I'd want to push that to something that's a bit more like a 70-30. So if we had a silhouette, let's do it down here. Yeah, here's our priest. He's got a very simple silhouette. He's got his staff. On top of that, you know, maybe we have some kind of a big mechanical shape here, some kind of smaller mechanical shapes on the staff, but actually we leave that to be more of an accent, right, rather than half of the entire design. It's going to pop more if there's less of it, which is a little bit of a tricky thing to wrap your head around. Or you could go in the opposite direction And you could say, well, actually, no, the priest is like, this is all mechanical. They've got really mechanical arm bits, and they're almost like heavily armored, right, with this metal stuff. And then the 30% is like a bit of cloth that pokes out the back, right? But there's still that contrast between 70-30. It's a little bit difficult to illustrate, but hopefully you catch what I mean. This is the main thing that I want you to focus on, is the angles at which you're just showing off your design. I think challenging yourself to pick more dramatic angles is going to help you get better at drawing anyway, so it's kind of a win-win. Even the face, how far inset are his eyes? How close together are they? How wide are his nostrils? I can't tell because it's a side on. Whereas if it were, more of a 3/4, well, we can build up those features and say exactly what we want them to say. His beard's coming down there. He's got a big smile on his face. So yeah, the 3D nature of things. Just avoid anything that's perfectly flat in perspective, perfectly isometric. Even this staff. But this will be the last thing I say. I promise. So even the staff, if he was holding it, let's choose a color that we can actually see. Even if the character was holding the staff perfectly straight on to us as a viewer, it wouldn't look like this. It would look like this, right? So the ellipses on either end of the staff are going to go in different directions ever so slightly, and as those ellipses get closer to the center of the staff, they're going to even out until they're straight lines, right? Something like that, and that continues to get more extreme. So just think about where the contours are going there in perspective, even if you did want it to be straight. Okay. Someone's written something in VC. You can't see the artwork on stream. I assume you just mean on Discord. Let me stop streaming on Discord and then reshare. Does that work? Oh no, it still doesn't work. Tell you what, I'll just share my whole screen. Does mean you'll have to look at Discord. Right, next is this, which is it's got more of those 3D features that we were just talking about, which is good. Okay, so this person has said, still in my designing stage, would love to hear some criticism. That's a tricky one. That's a very tricky one. Because without knowing exactly what you're designing for, my criticism isn't going to be particularly helpful. It looks to me like a child that has a dragon spirit, maybe. But equally, this could be some kind of really crazy, elaborate costume or friend. If it is a spirit, is it trying to eat the girl? Does she wear it like a helmet? Maybe if she wears it like a helmet, then it shouldn't drag on the floor and it should float behind her. I think if it's intended to be a spirit, maybe that would be more obvious. So let's say here's our character with their hands on their hips. The spiritual element of that can still be, well, it's a big hat almost with big eyes. But as soon as it's up, it's got more of a weightless feeling to it, like a wisp. I think as soon as it goes down onto the floor, it feels very heavy. It feels more tangible, which makes this part here a little bit confusing. You know, is it a very tangible, solid thing that is contacting the floor and has weight? Or is it some kind of spiritual thing that can phase through other objects? That almost needs to be made clear, if I were to say anything. The drawing is fairly nice. Some of the proportions are a little bit odd. Like the hands are really, really, really tiny. The legs and crotch are probably too far down. You know, I think we get this idea that, and I don't draw many children, so maybe I'm wrong. I think we get this idea that if we have a character, here's our character, that within the total height of the character, the sort of crotch or pelvis line should be about halfway up that. If it's a particularly young character, then maybe you exaggerate that even more. I think there's different age ranges there where maybe it would be more beneficial to, obviously children seem to have bigger heads and so the ratio changes there. But still this feels like it's a little bit low to me. Like these legs are really, really quite short compared with this. Especially these really long, thin arms that are going for. So I think about changing that. But yeah, that's the main thing. What else can we think about? Just think about the silhouette of your character. I think the other thing that this helps with, you know, as well as it feeling very spectral and very spiritual in a sense, is that it gets this out of the way so that the character's silhouette can stand on its own. Whereas here, you know, a majority of the character is lost on the thing that they are stood in front of. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It could be that the colours or values on the dragon are locally darker, and so the silhouette is kept, or the other way around, maybe the dragon is lighter. But I'd be looking for ways to bring that back, you know, the silhouette of the character themselves. Okay. I think I'll leave it there without any further instruction. I don't want to I don't want to poke around too much. Okay. No, I don't want to do that. Next is this. We saw some of this a couple of streams ago, I'm sure. You're in VC as well. Do you want to unmute and tell me about this?
Okay, yeah. So this is just the redesign that I did after your last critique session of it.
Okay.
I'm just looking for a little more feedback, see if maybe I managed to sort of fix the problems, the issues that were presented.
Yeah, I think you fixed the problems that that we spoke about more or less. So, as a reminder for everyone on the stream or watching this as a video, I think the problem that we had originally was all three characters were
all look the same.
Yeah, they're effectively geometrically the same. It was just the colors and weapon that were different. So this is quite nice. You know, we're getting more of these triangular shapes that are dynamic in the archer. We're getting more rounded, softer shapes in this one, which is more of a healer. And the dragon actually has a tail, and those horns are exaggerated in a different way. So I really like the difference between the three now.
It's the hardest one, because it's supposed to be like wise and smart. But I the idea of a dragon sort of transformation doesn't really pertain to the sort of smart or wise. It feels more like powerful.
I guess it depends on what you think powerful is.
I guess.
I
Yeah.
would say most people associate dragons with being wise, or majestic would be the word, and it tends to be that things that are majestic are old and have some level of sentient, or sentient thought or wisdom to them. I think you're getting that. I think the fact that what this poses is a lot more symmetrical than the others gives it that kind of powerful, almost religious feeling to it, and I think people associate that with wisdom and knowledge, right? The hair sort of floating up and the orb. I mean, consulting an orb. That's nice and wise. The big horns, people associate that with age. You know, whether it's in deer or dragons or anything else. And again, age and wisdom come hand in hand, at least visually. So, I think you're getting wisdom here, fine. I think maybe if you gave the character a really big battle axe, then you'd go, well, they're not wise, they're just aggressive and powerful because they're a dragon. But the fact that they just have an orb while they're in dragon form, it feels more like they're going to be doing something with intelligence. I mean, this is for D&D, isn't it? So
Yes.
yeah, so if they are casting magic or whatever else, they have to have the intelligence stat, don't they?
Okay.
So that seems fine to me. Maybe the thing I would work on is exaggerating those differences even more. So the fact that this is really symmetrical is nice. This is dynamic in a different way, and then this one's kind of symmetrical like that one. Could it be? And I don't know if you're using this as like a character sheet or a splash art or something. But could it be that this is actually a 3/4 angle in a different direction, or could the poses be even more different? Could this one curl up a bit more into like a ball? More rounded? What if these... You'll have to forgive me for butchering this. What if these legs came up and back it up? I'm thinking like Zenyatta from
Yeah,
from
I
Overwatch,
got
but more, it's the same form, but just the pose changes the how compacted the body seems, and therefore
I like that
the
idea.
impression of, it's a bit like when you annoy a cat and its back arches. Like, the cat isn't transforming into a different being, but just the pose gives it some kind of sense of power or whatever else. Things make themselves seem bigger or smaller. If it's a healer, maybe it does want to seem smaller deliberately so it's less of a target. So that could work. This is very firmly planted on the floor. Maybe the other thing I'd do with the archer is just play around with the perspective of some of this stuff. Could it be that this is a foot, but that it's not quite planted firmly on the ground? It seems to me that it's a very flowy, dynamic thing, but then you get this perfectly straight line for the bottom of the foot, and all of a sudden it's not perfect and flowy anymore. It sort of grounds it and makes it feel a bit static. I know these are constellations, and so they're straight lines, but do they have to be?
I guess not.
Even a straight line on a 4-point perspective grid is curved. Could they be just ever so slightly bent? I'm almost imagining that the character is so powerful here that they're like bending. That the tension of the bow, the limbs of the bow bending is quite an important visual to show that it has energy stored inside of it that's going to be released when the arrow is fired. Whereas I think if you don't have that and the bow is a lot more angular, all of a sudden this doesn't feel very powerful, or it doesn't feel like it's brimming with kinetic energy, So I would think about bending that ever so slightly if you could. Maybe the other thing I'd do is, I think you've done a good job getting this soft glow. It was a bit too aggressive before, but but my feeling is that compared with the bow and compared with this, you could look at the healer and just think that they were holding their hands out and they're not actually doing anything.
Okay, yeah. I was told
you
to
know,
sort of
maybe it could be just a tiny bit more obvious.
that
Like
actually
it's
looks
still
like a
friendly,
color.
it's still warm, it's not aggressive, but it is there as opposed to just not
That makes sense.
sort of
Yeah.
standing out a whole lot. I regret butchering the legs like that. You know, if they're a healer, do they need feet? I don't know. Maybe they go sort of into this ephemeral form where they just sort of float like a wisp. I don't know. It sort of depends on you and how far you're willing to push it. Obviously, it's your D&D character, and you're gonna have to. I assume you're doing a campaign with these.
Not yet. So I have. It's in a while, so I have a lot of time to.
Yeah, but whatever change you'll make, you're committing to actually playing the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you do make the healer some kind of phantasmal being, or maybe they can fly, you know, and they get more movement points or whatever. I'm not a D&D. My only D&D knowledge is from Baldur's Gate 3, so.
That's right.
But yeah, it's something to think about.
So-
I'd go a bit more extreme, but I don't. I'm not sure on the gameplay implications, so I can't.
Thank you so much. This has been really helpful.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I will keep posting D&D characters until the day that you stop streaming.
Okay, I'll keep critiquing them. I could not input to clipboard. Oh, I can. I'm gonna start putting these in the Discord server before I forget, because I haven't done so far. And then we'll move on to the next one. Drangel is yours. Yeah, it is a spirit or a persona. The inspiration is from the characters from the game Ark Knight. I don't think I've played or watched Ark Knight. But yeah, if you want more in-depth feedback with it, I'm happy to give it to you. I just need more. I just want to know what you want to do with the character. I hope what I gave you already was helpful. Next person is Luna or Loon with this, which is very nice. And Loon has said, mostly looking for critique on how to blend the background into the illustration more, but I'm up for anything. Let's have a think. I think the main problem I have with it at the moment is a perspective issue. The thing that's preventing the character and the background from meshing more easily together is the fact that they're in different perspectives. The main thing that I want you to think about when you're tackling perspective isn't anything too complex. You don't need like a crazy grid. All you need is one of these bad boys, which is a horizon line. Forgive my awful handwriting. So a horizon line is a term that gets thrown out a whole lot. I think we can describe it in a simpler way as just our eye level, right? And this might sound obvious, but it's something that a lot of people seem to get wrong. So if this is our eye level, we can imagine that's me. Very weak chin. And a mustache. If this is our eye level, then anything above our eye level, let's say that we have a cube. Anything above our eye level, well, all of a sudden we can see the underside of it. Anything below our eye level, well, we can see the top of it, but we can't see the bottom of it. Okay, that's a simple enough concept to grasp without needing a grid or anything else. So relating that back to this. Okay. Well, I can see the top of the character's head. I can see the top of the character's shoulders, and going back to their actual back. I can see the top of their knees, top planes of their arms, the top of their feet. And so it seems to me that the horizon line has to be above the character somewhere, right? So it might be, we'll do this on a separate layer, might be that the horizon line, let's be generous, let's say that a push, the horizon line is there. So that's our eye level, right? Kind of makes sense in terms of the image because the character's sat down. As a viewer, just think about it narratively. Are we also sat down with them? Do you want the viewer to feel like they're stood up looking down at your character? Or, you know, it could be that the viewer is lying down on the floor looking up at the character even though they're sat down. I think defining the positioning of those things is going to be important. But the fact that our eye level is here, it's called a horizon line because that's where things recede to, means that the ground should really come up to that horizon. And we can place things on the ground, but the ground needs to go up there. So we can get whatever colors and things you have for the ground. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. You know, we can say that the ground is going up, that this character is sat, and it could be that up here we've got those trees and things that are going back. Okay, but do you see that the ground has to go higher? You can still have trees start lower, but if they're starting lower, you're telling us that they're closer to the viewer. Okay. The trees are also never going to start above the horizon. Well, they could start above the horizon line if there's a hill. So ignore that. Yeah. So I love all this grass stuff that you've got going on. We can play around with that. Okay. But I think that's the issue, is the perspective of the character isn't really matching the perspective of the background. Let's see if we can think about it in another way, just really quick. So let's represent our rib cage as a cube. We're gonna do something like this. Our pelvis is, well, actually the pelvis is gonna angle up some more. Because that whole body's twisting, isn't it? Then these thighs are coming up. And I don't necessarily actually draw this stuff when I'm drawing a figure, but I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about those shapes in 3D space. We still want to be able to see the top of the head. There, something like that. These things are coming down. Back in. Maybe I've drawn them a little bit small. I can make it bigger. Okay. Now, this ground that I drew, I sort of told you where I think the horizon line is, and you begin to get just a better sense of that the more you paint and draw. But the other way we can think about it is just as a plane. So these are cubes, but on these cubes we could just get rid of the sides and just think about it as planes. 2D planes in space, like pieces of paper. And if this character is sat on a piece of paper or a rug or something we could think about, you know, the rug that you've given them is something like this, which is very flat. It could be that the rug is like that, but we're almost saying that it's the seat and their feet are going down, so maybe this is like a, you know, a cliff or something, and then the ground continues on from there, right? Do you see how that's the position that we've got? Whereas I think we could place our plane, like I said, up here, you know, and it actually gets bigger the more we're looking at it. And you could, you know, chop that in half. Do whatever else you have to do to it. But visualizing these things as 3D forms is the scenario that I think you want to move towards, and visualizing them together is the other thing. So you're starting from a character, I assume, then you're putting a background behind it. Even the word background implies that it's secondary to the character. And I would start thinking about these things in the same thought. Like the character and the environment that the character is in is the same thing. You're designing the image, not a background for the character to sit on, if that makes sense. I'm just gonna screenshot this. My clipboard is misbehaving, it would seem. And we'll put this in the feedback channel. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm more than happy to answer more questions about perspective whenever. Okay, this is the next image. This person has said that they're trying to make his armor look like he's actually in the environment rather than in front of a booth backdrop, which was kind of what we were just talking about, in a sense. You've not done an awful job. I think the armor does feel, to an extent, like it belongs to the environment that it's on. There are lots of cool and neutral tones. I don't necessarily think that that's the issue with the image, but let's just try and do even more of that, and see if that helps. So, you know, it's fairly simple when you have metal, is we can actually just sample the colors of the metal, the colors of the environment, and literally paint them in. So you've got this really strong highlight on this side. Judging by everything else, it seems like it's top lit, so maybe we don't have that strong highlight over there. But actually it sort of fractures where it's reflecting the tops of these waves. I think that could be something we do. Notice that there's an awful lot of blue going on. Like, if this is reflective metal, let's just sample that blue and put it back into the armor. Like, wherever this armor is facing the sky, or anything else, it's going to go blue. We've got some ground down here. wherever the armor is facing the ground, it will go more of a ground color. Got all these cool greens and things. You know, again, this side has this light reflection. I don't necessarily know where that's coming from. Seems like there's some pretty dark spots down here towards the ground. Okay, so maybe we could start to block them in. You know, the kneecap, as soon as that's facing down, that's going to get darker. That's going to get darker. Right, and so a big part of this is just going around bit by bit, sampling the colours that are around this thing, and placing them back down. Is there a sun? Let's assume there is a sun. Well, is it just right above? It might well be. That's something that we can think about. Okay, so that's the first thing. The way that I would arrange my thoughts, if we want to say that. The way that I would think about this is, here's me, there's my mustache, I'm in a shirt, right, I've got my glasses on as well. And I'm sat on my desk chair, okay, and my desk chair has all of its wheels poking out. Okay, and when I'm sat on my desk chair, literally whatever is in front of me, so in one instance it might be my wall. I'm doing this as we speak, so I'm looking at my wall and I'm saying my wall is that, which looks a bit odd on a white background, but contextually that makes sense to me. Okay, now my desk chair swivels. Okay. And now I'm swiveled, and now I'm looking at the top of my monitor, and I get this color. Right? So this is what's happening with every point on a piece of metal, is the thing that it is reflecting is the thing that it is facing, the direction that the plane is facing. And so genuinely, when I'm painting metal, this is how I will think about it, is I am on the surface of the metal walking around, and whichever direction I happen to be forced to face, if I am, you know, lying down on the metal or whatever, that's the color I'm going to pick up. So when I'm on this arm, I'm imagining that my little face is down here. Here I am. There's my little mustache. And I'm going, huh? What can I see? And then I'm imagining that my head is turning. And so when I'm on this side of the metal, I'm facing forward and I'm going, huh? What's that way? And so you're looking out from all these different points. Maybe that's an insanely weird and complicated way to describe how I would navigate this problem. But that's how I think about it, is what would I see from that position if I had a little tiny Joe wandering around up and down this character. Okay, so let me put that in the Discord, and then I want to talk about something that I think is just a little bit more important to the image. I don't necessarily think that the rendering of the metal is what's going on at the moment. I just think it's very noisy, very, very noisy, and maybe we want to think about solidifying some of these groups. So, okay, here's our character. If our character really is just silhouetted on the background, can we just push those groups further apart? So you've already got all the information there. All I'm saying is, well, look, can we make these darks on the character a little bit darker so they stand out a little bit more? And then maybe all of the waves just go a little tiny bit brighter. Okay, so they still have information in them. It's just that information is in a group which is lower contrast. Okay. Whatever's going on with this hand, I have no idea. Let's make that darker so it's silhouetted more nicely. Same thing over here. Okay. You know, even the front of the mask. It could be if these things are metal, that actually they're reflecting something dark in front of the character. You know, is the character backlit? I don't know. Okay, but all I'm thinking about is making the character stand out a lot more from the background that they're sat on. And then this big dragon-y creature. Let's I'm going to do a very similar thing. We could go darker with the background. Or we could go lighter. I'm going to go lighter. So I'm going to say that all of the dragon, especially when it's behind the character, by royal decree is going to go brighter. So we have these very clear group separations between these things, right? It doesn't work that well because I've just done it with black and white on top of everything. Maybe if we use a luminosity layer, it'll work better. Right, but you can see the difference is this is very visually muddy. There's a lot of contrast and it's everywhere. We want contrast between groups, not within groups, if that makes sense. And now we have some kind of more established silhouette, more of that contrast. And then on top of that, we can place our reflected colors in the metals, and they still work. And then we can have Mini Joe going about and looking at all of the different colors that are around everywhere. Okay. So let's just grab this, put this in the Discord, and then we'll move on. Who's next? We'll do you because you're in the VC. So, I don't know if you feel comfortable unmuting and describing what it is you want feedback on here, or you can type it out if you want, or it's completely up to you. I can't see your username because I'm on streamer mode. We'll assume that you just want portrait advice, and we'll go from there. Okay. So, let's have a think about this. I think there's a lot of different colours going on here, and they don't necessarily relate to a bigger picture. So there's a light source coming from over here that's reflecting a lot of these interesting purples and things, and all of those purples are hitting these side planes. So you're doing a relatively good job of that. Side of the lips, okay. But then there's an inconsistency here where the purple is also hitting this side plane, which is facing in the complete opposite direction. Like, there's no way that this purple should be reflecting on the right side plane of the nose if it's coming from the left. You might get some of it reflect here, like on the side of the eye, because the eye does come out a little bit, the orbit and ball of the eye. But that's less likely. Now, you've also got what appears to be, it's probably coming from over here, a very strong blue light source. Right, so all of this plane is lighting up. This plane is lighting up. But I think you're being very conservative with where you're having that light hit, and again in a kind of inconsistent way. So you've got it hitting over here, which, you know, might be a reflection of something going on in the background. That's fine. So let's take this plane here on the lips, just as an example. We're gonna eat into a chunk of this, so we've got somewhere to think. So we've got the corners of the mouth, and then let's start breaking up this mouth into these different planes, like geometry. So actually we've got planes that go back underneath. The top lip is going to come out, probably something like this, and then it's going to start going back up this way. Right, so hopefully you can see that I'm almost beginning to develop this kind of like wireframe impression of what this would be. You know, this is going to come down here, and then it might actually come back out for something like the chin. Your nose is going to be here, right? Okay. So remember, little Joe, little Morrow, is sat down on his swivel chair and he's looking to see what is in front of him. Okay, so he's thinking about the angle that he's on. Let's say that's the rest of the head. So let's just select one of these planes. For you, it's this plane here on the side of the lips, okay? And it's facing that way, okay? What you have to now do is any other plane on the face that is facing the same direction, that is oriented in the same way, has to also pick up that light. So it's kind of going facing up, slightly to the left, and mostly forwards. So what else is doing that? Well, you're going to have a whole front plane of the nose. That's going to be facing the same way. You're definitely going to get a plane on the side of the chin that's going to face the same way. It's probably going to be likely that the entire left half of that face is going to face the same way. You know, is a top plane of the forehead going to face a similar way? Then a top plane of that orbit of the eye. Okay, so you can see that as soon as we say that that's being lit up, you know, is it also that part of the top lip is facing in the same direction? Just think about all of these other planes of the face that are facing towards the same direction. That's where we're going to want that light to hit. So, if it's there, it's going to be there, it's going to be there. You know, it might well be there. Maybe not. It's going to come up here. Is it going to be here on the forehead? Well, maybe. I think it will almost certainly appear on the nose in some place or another. So those are all things to think about and consider. It's just the angle at which this light is reflecting. Okay. The other thing I think you might be unconsciously doing or subconsciously doing is separating out different elements into shapes that should really be grouped. So let's have a think how we can describe this. You're saying that this shape for a head is separate to this shape for a neck, which is separate to this ear, etc., etc. You know, it might be separate even to this is another piece for this cloth down here. Okay? And you're defining those with pretty strong boundaries that I don't think necessarily have to be there. So it's almost like you've gone, well, this is the jaw and this is part of the head and not the neck, and so I have a line there. Even though it's a painting, you don't need that line there. So let's just try and smudge that boundary together a little bit. You know, you might find that actually we don't need such an obvious boundary here. You know, maybe you want a shadow under the chin or something. But we can leave this a little bit undefined, or if there is a boundary there, it doesn't need to be so strong, you know. That would be okay as well. Same idea with the ear. You seem to have this huge gap between the side of the head and the jaw and where the ear's actually coming out. So it might be that ear needs to move in ever so slightly, and then when it does move in, like, actually, can we join these together in some kind of a way? They don't need to be seen as separate elements. Now, I've also highlighted this area for the cloth, and I know it's not skin, but you know, can the cloth join up with the background? Is there a shadowy part of the neck down here where actually the cloth and the neck are part of the same shape? You know, it could be, right? And so when you're painting, I think the biggest piece of advice that I kind of have is it's much less about boundaries between objects like it is in drawing. This is a very logical way to draw and think about drawing, is boundaries between objects. And with painting, it's almost like a series of 2D shapes that sit on top of all those objects, and they might group them together. You know, you could have a big shape like that, that's a big shadow shape, that sits on top of all of those groups at the same time. Right? And joins them together. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I think that's enough for you to work on. Other small things anatomically, just think about this. This is the barrel of the mouth. It's kind of an egg shape or barrel shape. I think you've got it inset too far that way at the moment. I think it should come out a little bit further. I think it should be a tiny little bit higher up, closer to the nose. You know, if you take the gap from the nose to the chin, at the moment your mouth is here. I would split it into thirds, and then I would have the mouth be on that top third. So somewhere there. Just really depends on the anatomy of the person you're painting. Could be that this woman's face does look like this, so it's a little bit tricky to think about. But hopefully a lot of that stuff makes sense. I'll plop this in feedback. And then it seems like we've got one more. Oh, thank you, Elliot. I'll make you one if you want, pal. Big PS2 Hagrid floating along the screen. Squish that down. Right, this is Eduardo. And Eduardo has said that this is character design work. The big guy and girl are supposed to be like Samson and Delilah. And the small guy is supposed to be an evil sultan who turns out to be not so evil by the end. You're going for a kind of shape-based approach, so I would be tempted to just push those shapes more. Bigger shapes rather than smaller shapes would be preferable, and cleaner shapes would be preferable. So let's take... Okay, let's think about it. So, when you're defining very graphic shapes, those graphic shapes are representative of a 3D form in space. And so we have to be very particular and very precise about what exactly those shapes are doing, and what exactly the form is that we're trying to represent. So these eyes, for example, that's painfully difficult to see. So you've got this eye here. And then this eye here is doing something like that. And the character looks a bit cross-eyed. Okay, because what we actually need to think about is, well, okay, we have an orbit of an eye or an eyeball. The orbit of the eye is what it sits in. Okay, so we can imagine that this is sitting in another 3D space. Maybe something like that. Okay. And then if this eye is facing away from us, well, let's think about the eyelid. Which might be doing something like that. And then let's think about where the pupil sits on that eyelid. So if you have this is an eyeball that's facing sideways. You know, there's a really tiny nose and then a big forehead. There's an eyebrow. This little horrid alien. So even if a person is facing perfectly this way to the left, their pupil isn't going to be like that, right? Because it's a hole on the front of a sphere. The pupil actually needs to be inset, right? Or it could be even at the back of the sphere. It's a little bit tricky to think about. So if this guy is looking up there, their eye might not actually be up there, but it will be towards that side, maybe not touching the very edge like you've done it. Okay. And so once we've established that this is the 3D form that's happening, well, actually maybe we want to go back to something very 2D and very cartoonish, which is fine. But instead of this, which I will just select. So this is the shape that you had before. Okay. Bearing this in mind, we can get a shape that's just as simple but maybe one that reads as being a lot more sort of solid in 3D space. It's a tiny change, but it has a big impact. You know, it's a similar thing with the horns on this helmet. Well, the helmet, you know, this ellipse that's coming around the head. Well, that means something, you know. And as the helmet gets further up and further away from the head, those ellipses should get more extreme, to the point where if this horn is sat on the side of it, you know, that has a very particular ellipse. This over here has a very particular shape in perspective to the other one. It might seem like I'm being very artsy-fartsy, but I think it's necessary to have this closer a view of it when you're thinking about the shapes that you're putting down. Another thing that we can think about is there's just a center line for the character. So imagining that this is, and we'll give it an ellipse at the bottom to make it just a bit more 3D feeling. Maybe we'll give it an ellipse at the top. Okay, so this is the kind of cylindrical barrel shape that we have for this character's torso. Well, on that shape, where's the midpoint? I'm going to suggest that the midpoint is here. God, these colours aren't very easy to see, are they? Let's just do it in white. No, black. Okay, so if that's my midpoint, and I'll turn the opacity down on this. Okay, then these strands of hair that are coming down on each side, like, do you want them to be the same distance from the midpoint? I would say probably. So it might be that we leave this strand of hair here, but this strand of hair actually needs to go further that way, right? And that's not a nitpicky small difference. It's reinforcing the 3D form that you have going on. It's actually making Samson feel more like his chest is puffed out and he's a big, strong, powerful character. But this is going in a slightly different direction. Okay, so small changes that have a big impact. Now Samson is, I'm not a very religious person, but as far as I'm aware, Samson is famed for having crazy hair, and doesn't Delilah cut off his hair and then he has no power anymore or something. So maybe that's something I would exaggerate in the designs. I guess it depends on whether or not this is Samson pre or post hair being cut off, and whether I actually know anything about that story. But again, like, this shape for the chest plate well, now that we've established that his, the shape of his torso could be like a tapered cylinder, well, the chest plate's going to have to follow that ellipse, so it's actually going to bend down at the top, down at the bottom, right, to make something that feels a lot more like all of these shapes are complementing each other and working together with each other to tell us a story about a 3D form. Okay. The last thing I'll say, and all of the feedback I've given so far I think applies to all three of these. I think Delilah is the most successful just because of how simple she is. The last thing I'll say is just the confidence of it. So a lot of these lines you're sort of scratching them and they're very wibbly wobbly and they don't feel like you've put them down confidently. How many individual lines are there in this arm? Well, that's a lot. And there are all these sort of very small nervous shapes as well. Could we just simplify this and say his whole arm is just that? It's one S-curve. It's more or less a straight line with a bend in the top. And then maybe this is an S-curve as well. So maybe it goes up and then down. Right, and that's a much more confident shape that reads nicely. So a big part of it is just faking it till you make it. Making these confident, bold decisions that look nice. And they're not just confident, they're simple, I guess. Simple isn't the right word. No, simple is the right word. I think the problem that I find is that people conflate simple with loose. Let's think about this just for a second. Okay, so you see loose and you go, well, I want to draw a circle, and so I'll do that. That's a circle. Like, that's loose. But simple might actually be very precise. Very precise. It's simple. It's not very complex, but it's very precise. It's exactly where I want it to be, and that's what I'm talking about with all of this shenanigans, right? Where we're saying, no, this shape has to be a very, very particular thing. These have to be this far away from each other, plotted on top of something that feels 3D. You might not necessarily draw that 3D thing, but you need to understand that it's there. Whereas it feels like you're saying, well, this is cartoony, this is graphic, and therefore I'm going loose. So you're not getting the precision, you're just getting these sort of wild brushstrokes, which it's almost like, how else can I describe it? I want to describe, every time I come up against these kinds of problems during these critique sessions, I want to try and describe them in as many different ways as possible, so that if you don't understand one of the ways I've described it, you've got another one to fall back on. So let's talk about the decision economy. Let's think about it this way. Okay. So, the style you've chosen is simplistic, and that means that you have less detail to work with. Okay, so you have less choices at your disposal to convey form, we'll say, rather than more choices. Okay, so you're restricted in terms of your choice, right? That doesn't mean that you need to be more careless with your choices. It actually means you need to be a lot more careful with your choices. So think about it like you're walking into a supermarket to buy your food for the week. And on the one hand, I give one person £100 for the week, and I say go and buy whatever food you want, well, they might also pick up, while they're there, a magazine. They might buy themselves some chocolate biscuits, some Freddos. I don't know if you have Freddos where you're from. Whatever else, they're gonna be less careful with those decisions because they have more decisions to spend. And that's kind of when you're painting very realistically, is you've got a bit more room to play around and involve more decisions in some of these shapes that you're making. They can be a lot more complex and characteristic, and you can expend the time on them and the effort on them. But if I send you into the supermarket and I only give you £10 for the whole week, you're probably going to be ruthlessly efficient and say, I'm going to buy bread and beans, and that's all I'm going to live on. And so that's how I like to think about it, is this style is limiting the amount of choice that you have. So you better be careful with the choices that you're making, right? You better make the most of them, try and stretch them as far as you can. How much heavy lifting can you get one of these shapes to do? Well, if you spend your choice on this eye as opposed to this eye, you're getting more mileage out of the same amount of decision. Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes I feel like I ramble a fair bit. Okay. So, let's screenshot this, and then as far as I am aware, unless anyone else has put anything in feedback, which they might have. No, they haven't. That's it for today. So it's been an hour and 17 minutes. Do join the Discord server. It's public and free. There is a separate Patreon server where I do this kind of feedback whenever you want it, rather than just once a week. I'll give you paint overs and one-on-one feedback if you don't want your feedback being broadcast to the entire planet as well. But the public server is free. You can drop work in there, and every Monday I will endeavor to hop on a stream and go through it. So I hope this has been enlightening. Do check out the other recordings as well. It's quite nice that we're building up like a catalogue of problems that are being solved, because if you're having a problem with your painting, you can bet that I've given someone some very similar critique on something else. So I've always found it's a really great way to learn, is actually watching other people receive feedback and seeing how much of that feedback applies to my own work. Okay. Well, have a good one, and I'll be around.